I want to go back 8 years to your work at the IMF with Carlo Cottarelli, 10 Commandments for Fiscal Adjustment in the Advanced Economies. I guess that basically means the United States of America's gone to hell. What do we do with $1 trillion deficit? France didn't do this. We did this.
So the initial increase in the debt during the crisis was justified, and we've discussed this many times. We're talking about the last one. And the forecast that just came out, it is clearly ill-timed in a major way. And this fiscal expansion really has no macro justification. And the question is whether this is a source of enormous worries or mild worries. My sense is the interest rates are very low. So the burden of the debt at this stage, although the debt is too high, the burden of the debt is not very high. I mean, the interest rates are lower than the growth rates. So it's not as if we absolutely need to do something today about it. It is not the issue which is going to kill the recession or anything, or the expansion or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, eventually we have to, reduce the deficit and use monetary policy to maintain demand.
To adverbs like eventually, which I think most of our viewers and listeners understand, is the mathematics that you have studied. I think of your student, Jordi Galli, is one of the fancy mathematics that you believe in. If we have a debt expansion and if we have chronic trillion-dollar deficits, is it a linear and controllable function, or does it snap at some point?
I think for the US, it doesn't snap, or it snaps at levels of debt that we're unlikely to reach even if we misbehave. For some countries, it can snap. I mean, in some countries, you suddenly get investors changing their mind. There's a major sudden stop, and things go bad very quickly. I think for the US, that's not the issue. But the more debt you have, the more interest payments, the more taxes, and eventually you have to do something. So I don't think, again, that that's something which needs to be done now. The mistake was made. It has to be slowly repaired through smaller deficit, steadily smaller deficit, as long as monetary policy can accommodate. And we're starting to have some room to use it. So I think it's a 10-year project at this point.
Within economics, this is something, folks, the common ground of Joe Stiglitz of Columbia University and John B. Taylor out at Stanford is nobody has thought harder about the future of macroeconomics than Olivier Blanchard. You have provided leadership from the IMF over to the Peterson Institute of saying, okay, we have these models. This is what happened in the crisis. We're 10 years on. What's the new macro look like? Is the new macro the old macro, or are we searching for new models?
It's a mix. I think the new macro is the old macro plus two things. The financial sector is much more central, much more complex, so we understand that. And then what we call non-linearities in our nerdy language.
What do you mean by that?
That things can go wrong fairly quickly. I think the vision before was things can deteriorate, but relatively slowly for an advanced economy like the US. And what we learned is that in a few days, something can go very wrong. When the investors start panicking and we don't have the means to stop it.
And that link into the financial system as well.
I think the non-linearities come largely from the financial system, which is that, again, investors are very volatile. Right. They can react very strongly, and when they react very strongly, things happen. So I think we've learned that. Now, is there a new macro yet? No. In the sense of a corpus of things that we all believe. But if you look at the research which is being done, say, by the NBER or the research institutions, it is amazing how much progress there is. So we're not there yet.
Right.
New macro is still in front of us, but it's not like old macro, and it will be better.
Chairman Greenspan joins us this morning, and of course he does not speak about Fed officials. You can speak about Richard Clarida, the new vice chairman. What incredible shoes to fill, trying to replace Stanley Fischer as that vice chairman of monetary theory. Rich Clarida of DSGE, Dynamic Stochastic General Equilibrium theory, he has a new humility about those fancy models that he and you and others came up with. What is the character of the humility of monetary PhDs as they advise someone like Chairman Powell?
I think it has a lot to do with having as a grandfather, in an intellectual sense, Stan Fischer. I'm actually the father of Rich in terms of thesis writing. But I think what Stan pushed very strongly is humility. That basically we know a lot, but there's a whole lot we don't know. And I think we came out of MIT, all of us, with that humility. And the feeling that we understood something and we could push ahead, but we did not understand everything. And then Rich has been at PIMCO for a long time. And when you're in the real world, you become much more realistic as to what works and what doesn't work.
This is a Surveillance Bureau exclusive, Body and Mark, this morning with Olivier Blanchard, that academics in the real world change. Is that what happens?
They adapt.
They adapt, as you did.
They do not change. They adapt.
As you did at the IMF. Very quickly here, I want to talk about a theory near dear to your heart, which is how our central banks unwind. It's an optimal path and even an optimal timeline. Chairman Bernanke's optimistic that the balance sheets can unwind.
I think it can be done. I don't see any enormous difficulty in doing it, but it's going to be delicate fine-tuning. The way I think about it is you're in a race and you don't exactly know where the finish line is and you don't know exactly at what speed you're going. And the goal is to basically cross the finish line but not go too far after that. And I think all the central banks of advanced economies are in that situation. In the US, we have a sense the finish line is fairly close, but how strong the speed is and how much we'll have to increase, put on the brakes, increase interest rates, is very difficult, and Jay Powell will have to basically find out. He can do it with his team, the board, and all. In Europe, it's a bit different. I think the finish line is much further out. The speed is not quite as strong as in the US. So it's going to be trying to adjust both. It's going to be, I think the important message, it's going to be contingent. I mean, I cannot tell you today, and Jay Powell or Mario Draghi cannot tell you I'm going to do this, and that. But he can tell you, as a function of the numbers, this is what we're going to do. And I think both of them are extremely good. They have good teams. It's not impossible to do. May fail one way or the other, but it will work.
Very quickly here, I must have you comment on this thing, Mr. Macron of France. It's a new France, isn't it?
Well, Monsieur Macron is the new France, but as you probably see when you watch the news, there's still a lot of the old France there, which is the anger, the ability to basically go in the streets and occupy buildings. He is going through a tough time. I profoundly think that what he wants to do is essential for France, but May in France, we're now in April, but it's going to go into May. May in France is a difficult political month. The weather is nice. It's nice to be in the streets demonstrating. The students are perfectly happy to be outside rather than inside. There are a lot of convergent tensions. And so I think we have to watch the next month very carefully, because if Monsieur Macron does not succeed, then it's really bad news for France. But it's terrible news for Europe. It basically says that Macron is basically the good answer to the populist alternative. And if he fails, then I worry very much that we'll see trouble.
I have to leave it there. Olivier Blanchard, as always, thank you so much for joining us. These spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund.